Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, have you ever wondered why Christmas, a season of joy and light, sometimes feels shadowed by busyness and distraction? In the quiet corners of this sacred season lies a secret, a chance for spiritual renewal that goes beyond the festivities. C.S. Lewis teaches us that Christmas is the moment when eternity steps into time, a divine invitation to let the presence of Christ transform our hearts. This transformation begins when we shift our focus away from the world's noise and consumption, and instead prepare our hearts in humility, stillness, and prayer. Are we making space for the true light of Christ to dwell within us, or are we letting the seasons slip by, wrapped in temporary concerns? The Incarnation is a mystery that holds the power to reshape not just our Christmas, but our entire lives. As we journey through these reflections on God's humility, the call to simplicity, and the beauty of transformative faith, may we rediscover the essence of Christmas. Christmas, as C.S. Lewis beautifully expressed, is not merely a celebration of an ancient event. It is the extraordinary moment when eternity steps into time, God's boundless, divine nature, wrapped in the constraints of human frailty. The birth of Christ is a cosmic interruption, a divine call to renewal and transformation that touches the deepest parts of our lives. We are invited to see beyond the lights and carols and enter a space of true spiritual renewal. Are we open to receiving this eternal transformation? You may have noticed how easy it is for this season to become just another annual ritual, a mixture of busy preparations and hollow traditions. But Christmas carries an invitation to pause, to listen, and to allow Christ's presence to breathe new life into us. It is a reminder that renewal is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. As we celebrate, we are beckoned to look inward and ask ourselves, is my heart truly ready for the light of Christ to dwell within me? C.S. Lewis teaches that this renewal begins not with grand gestures, but with humility and a willingness to be transformed. Just as the Creator entered our world in the simplest way, as a child in a manger, our own transformation begins with simple acts of faith, hope, and love. Can we, in this season, set aside our need for control and open ourselves to God's quiet but powerful work in our lives? The Apostle Paul reminds us in Romans 12:2, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." The Christmas story is more than a tale. It is the fulfillment of God's promise of redemption. Are we allowing the message of hope, humility, and transformation to shape our hearts, or are we swept up by the distractions and noise of the world? It is in this season of Advent that we are called to prepare our hearts for the arrival of Christ. This preparation is not passive waiting, but a conscious clearing away of the clutter that clouds our souls. Through prayer, reflection, and acts of service, we cultivate the soil of our hearts for God's transformative grace. Are we willing to let go of the unnecessary, the trivial, and the fleeting to make room for the eternal? As we enter this season, let us embrace the essence of Christmas: gratitude, simplicity, and a deep awareness of God's presence. In doing so, we position ourselves for a renewal that extends beyond this season and touches every part of our lives. And perhaps, as we open our hearts, we will see that this transformation is not just for us, but for those around us. In this sacred season, we are called to examine the state of our hearts. Are we ready to receive the presence of Christ, or have we allowed the world's noise to drown out his gentle call? C.S. Lewis once remarked that distractions and fleeting pleasures often lead us away from what truly matters. This time of Advent invites us to quiet our hearts and focus on the eternal, Have you ever felt a deep longing for more amid the chaos of the holidays? That ache is a holy invitation to something richer, a chance to prepare your heart for the light of Christ. Reflect for a moment. What fills your mind as Christmas approaches? Is it the rush of consumption and expectations, or the anticipation of God's profound gift of love and renewal? Just as a home must be cleaned and prepared to welcome a guest, our hearts need preparation to welcome Christ. This preparation requires silence, prayer, and an honest look at our priorities. Are there places in your heart that need to be cleared of pride, worry, or selfishness to make room for His presence? The world promises fulfillment through busyness and material gain, but the promise of God is different. Psalm 46:10 reminds us, "Be still and know that I am God." In stillness, we recognize the distractions that pull us away from Him. In reflection, we realize that true joy comes not from what we acquire, but from whom we receive. Preparing our hearts means resisting the pull of consumerism and embracing the quiet wonder of the Incarnation. C.S. Lewis taught that the greatest danger to our spiritual life is not great sins, but the slow drift of neglect. Have we allowed the trivial to replace the eternal? Preparing our hearts means returning to the simplicity and humility of that first Christmas night. It means choosing adoration over ambition, devotion over distraction, and gratitude over greed. Is your heart ready to kneel at the manger in awe and humility? This preparation is not only for our benefit, but for the sake of those around us. When our hearts are tuned to God's presence, we become bearers of His light to others. Our readiness to welcome Christ shapes how we share hope, love, and generosity with a world in need. Are we prepared to be vessels of His grace and agents of transformation in our families, communities, and beyond? As we reflect and prepare, let us embrace the quiet disciplines of prayer, stillness, and service. In doing so, we clear away the clutter and make room for the One who brings eternal renewal. And perhaps, in this clearing, we will begin to sense the mystery of the Incarnation calling us deeper into the heart of Christmas. Imagine your heart as a home, waiting for a beloved guest. The days before their arrival are spent dusting off forgotten corners, clearing cluttered spaces, and making sure every room is welcoming and warm. In this season of Advent, our hearts too need to be tidied, made ready for the arrival of Christ. Are we sweeping away the cobwebs of distraction and worry? Or have we let the dust of worldly concerns settle thickly on our souls? C.S. Lewis once likened the human heart to a garden. Left untended, weeds of pride, selfishness, and anxiety creep in. Advent is a season for careful gardening, pulling up those weeds so that the flowers of faith, hope, and love can bloom. Have you ever noticed how a neglected garden becomes tangled and lifeless? So too can our hearts become entangled with consumption and busyness if we fail to tend them with prayer and reflection. In the midst of holiday chaos, the noise of the world is like a cluttered attic, filled with forgotten, unnecessary things. It is so easy to let this clutter fill every corner of our minds. But Christ's coming calls us to clear away this debris. In Psalm 46:10, God's invitation is simple yet profound. Be still and know that I am God. In stillness, we open the windows of our hearts and let in the light of Christ. C.S. Lewis warned that the greatest danger is not a sudden collapse of faith, but a slow drift into spiritual numbness. Like a ship that loses its course by just a few degrees, a heart distracted by the fleeting promises of the world can miss the harbor of God's presence. Are we allowing consumerism and expectations to steer us off course? Or are we deliberately charting a path back to the simple, humble manger where Christ waits? Preparing our hearts means choosing devotion over distraction, like a candle quietly burning in a dark room. When we set aside time for prayer, we become like that candle, radiating hope and light. This preparation transforms us from within, making us vessels of God's grace. Are we ready to be lanterns of His love, offering light to those stumbling in darkness? In this season, let us see Advent as an opportunity to renovate the interior of our souls. Through acts of charity, moments of silence, and reflections of gratitude, we make room for the One who transforms dust into beauty. And as we prepare, we may begin to sense a divine whisper, reminding us that true joy is found not in the clutter of this world, but in the mystery of His humble arrival. Imagine the infinite God stepping down into the cramped confines of a manger, the creator of the cosmos, who spoke the stars into existence, became a fragile child. C.S. Lewis described this as the grand miracle, a moment when the divine stooped to touch the human. The Incarnation is not simply a historical event. It is a divine rescue mission, a breathtaking act of love and humility. Have you ever considered the weight of such a mystery? That the One who holds the universe chose to be held in the arms of His mother. In this act, God clothed Himself in flesh to draw near to us. It is as if a mighty author stepped into his own story, not with the majesty of a king, but with the vulnerability of a newborn. This is the paradox of the Incarnation, the eternal becoming temporal, the Almighty becoming dependent. The Apostle John captures this beautifully in John 1:14. The Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. Are our hearts still capable of being awed by this profound reality, or has it become just another scene in a Christmas pageant? C.S. Lewis reminds us that the Incarnation is God's way of bridging the chasm between heaven and earth. Picture a rescuer lowering himself into the depths of a dark well to save those trapped below. This is the love of God in action, a descent into our broken world to lift us out of sin and despair. How often do we forget that the stable is a doorway through which God entered to offer us redemption? The humility of this divine act reveals a startling truth. The kingdom of God doesn't follow the logic of earthly power. Christ's birth in a manger among shepherds and animals is a declaration that true greatness lies in service, not splendor. The Incarnation whispers to us that God's ways are not our ways. Do we recognize that His path to glory is paved with humility, simplicity, and sacrifice? In the quiet of that first Christmas night, the world received a gift wrapped in obscurity. No grand announcements in royal courts, just a star and the song of angels to shepherds in the fields. The mystery of the Incarnation challenges us to look beyond the surface, to see the eternal significance hidden in the ordinary. Are we paying attention, or are we too distracted by the noise of modern life to hear the angel's song? This mystery invites us to embrace a faith that sees beyond appearances. As we ponder the Incarnation, let us remember that God is near, stepping into our daily struggles and joys. And perhaps, as we reflect on this grand miracle, our hearts will open to the transformative power of His presence, a presence that still chooses to dwell among us today. Picture a king whose throne is not of gold, but of hay, whose crown is not jeweled, but made of thorns. This is the astonishing image of God's humility revealed in the birth of Christ. C.S. Lewis reminds us that while earthly kings seek power and grandeur, the King of Heaven chose a manger over a palace. The infinite made Himself small, The all-powerful chose simplicity and service. Have you ever wondered why God would choose such a path? In this choice, God turns our understanding of greatness upside down. The light of Christ entered the world not with overwhelming force, but with the gentle glow of a newborn. This humility is not weakness, but the purest form of strength and love. Philippians 2:7 tells us, "He made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant." Are we willing to follow this path of humility, or do we still cling to the world's illusions of status and success? Imagine standing before two doors, one ornately decorated, the other plain and worn. The world urges us to enter the first, seeking prestige and wealth. Yet Christ's door is the second, marked by humility and sacrifice. To choose this door is to embrace a life where service to others becomes a reflection of God's presence in us. Have we considered what door we are walking through this Christmas? C.S Lewis warns that pride blinds us, while humility opens our eyes to truth. The manger is more than a symbol. It is a mirror reflecting our need for simplicity and surrender. In a world obsessed with consumption and self-promotion, God's humility invites us to step back, to let go of distractions and remember what truly matters. Can we lay aside our pride and kneel at the manger with hearts open to receive His grace? God's humility also teaches us that He is near to the lowly and the overlooked. The first to witness Christ's birth were shepherds, not kings, ordinary people whose lives were touched by the extraordinary. This shows us that God's presence is often found in unexpected places. Are we looking for Him in the quiet, humble moments of our lives, or are we too caught up in the glittering promises of the world? As we reflect on the humility of Christ, let us seek to embody it. True spiritual renewal begins when we adopt His posture of service and gratitude. In this humility, we find freedom from the burdens of pride and the relentless pursuit of more. Perhaps, as we embrace God's humility, we'll discover that the path of simplicity leads us closer to the heart of Christmas and the light of Christ. Imagine standing in a bustling marketplace, voices shouting, colors flashing, and the constant pull of countless goods clamoring for your attention. This is often the state of our hearts during the Christmas season, a whirlwind of consumerism and busyness that drowns out the gentle whisper of God. C.S. Lewis warns that one of the greatest dangers to our spiritual life is not overt rebellion, but the slow, subtle drift caused by distraction. Have you felt this pull, where the true essence of Christmas slips through your fingers like sand? The world is adept at keeping us occupied with glittering but hollow pursuits, shopping lists, social events, and the pressure to create the perfect holiday can fill our days to the brim. Yet, these distractions are like waves on the surface of the ocean, restless, temporary, and shallow. Meanwhile, the still, deep waters of God's presence wait beneath. Are we willing to dive below the surface and find the quiet depths where true joy resides? In the story of Mary and Martha, Luke 10:38-42, Jesus gently reminds Martha that her worry and distraction over many things is keeping her from the one thing necessary. Mary, sitting quietly at His feet, has chosen what is better. What if, this Christmas, we chose to sit at the feet of Christ instead of racing through an endless list of tasks? Are we prepared to lay down the tyranny of busyness for the peace of His presence? C.S. Lewis wrote in the Screw-Tape Letters that the devil delights in keeping us busy with nothing, because distractions weaken our connection to God. The noise of the world is like static, keeping us from hearing the clear signal of God's voice. If we let the clamor of consumption and expectations dominate our minds, we may miss the quiet miracle of the Incarnation. How can we reduce this noise and tune our hearts to the light of Christ? Avoiding distractions doesn't mean withdrawing completely, but choosing to engage meaningfully. Like a lighthouse cutting through the fog, we can fix our eyes on what matters: gratitude, prayer, and acts of charity. These practices anchor us to the essence of Christmas, Christ's love entering a weary world. Can we clear away the clutter, creating space to see his light shining through the darkness? Let this season be one where we resist the pull of distraction and embrace the simplicity of Christ's birth. In the quiet, humble setting of the manger, we find everything we need: hope, love, and the promise of redemption. Perhaps as we silence the noise around us, we will hear the angel's song anew, calling us to a deeper, richer experience of God's presence. Advent is like the soft glow of a candle in a darkened room, slowly growing brighter as we draw near to Christmas. It is not just a countdown to a festive day, but a season of active preparation, an opportunity to clear the pathways of our hearts. C.S. Lewis reminds us that waiting for Christ is not passive, but filled with purpose. Have you ever thought of this waiting as a journey of renewal, rather than just a pause before celebration? In the same way a traveler packs light for a long journey, we too are called to lighten our hearts of unnecessary burdens, worries, resentments, and distractions. Advent offers us a chance to strip away the clutter and rediscover the beauty of simplicity and reflection. Are we holding on to things that block the way for Christ's arrival? What would happen if we laid them down and opened our hearts to his presence? C.S. Lewis spoke of the Christian life as one of readiness and anticipation. Just as a gardener prepares the soil for planting, Advent calls us to till the soil of our souls. Through prayer, stillness, and acts of generosity, we make room for the seed of faith to take root. In this preparation, we cooperate with God's grace, nurturing our hearts so they are ready to receive the light of Christ. Are you tending to your spiritual garden, or have weeds of distraction begun to overtake it? The Advent wreath, with its candles lit week by week, is a perfect metaphor for this gradual preparation. Each flame represents the growing hope, peace, joy, and love that come from Christ. As the light increases, so does our readiness to welcome the Saviour. But to experience this fully, we must step away from the frantic pace of life. Are we willing to pause, even for a moment each day, to let this light grow within us? This season also invites us to consider what kind of welcome we are preparing for Christ. Are our hearts like a cluttered inn, with no room left for him, or like the humble manger, simple, open, and ready? The essence of Advent is a quiet invitation to make space for the mystery of the Incarnation. Will we let our lives be transformed by this sacred waiting, or will we rush past it, caught up in the noise? As we journey through Advent, let us remember that this preparation shapes more than just the season. It shapes our entire spiritual life. In the quiet acts of devotion, service, and reflection, we prepare not only to celebrate the birth of Christ, but to receive his ongoing presence every day. And in this preparation, perhaps we will find that the light of Advent guides us steadily toward the eternal hope of Christmas. Picture a quiet lake at dawn, its surface smooth and undisturbed, reflecting the sky with perfect clarity. This is the kind of stillness our hearts need in order to hear the voice of God. C.S. Lewis often emphasized that it is in silence and prayer that we meet God most intimately. Yet, in our world filled with endless noise and activity, stillness can feel elusive. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to quiet your mind, even for a few moments? The clamor of responsibilities, distractions, and worries can be like ripples on that lake, distorting the reflection of God's presence. True spiritual renewal requires us to slow down, to pause, and to make space for prayer. In Matthew 6:6, Jesus advises us to go into our inner room, close the door, and pray to the Father who sees in secret. This kind of prayer is not a performance, but a sacred conversation. Are we creating such spaces in our lives, or are we letting the world's noise drown out his voice? C.S. Lewis wrote that our lives are often like a cottage with the shutters closed and the curtains drawn. Stillness and prayer open those shutters, allowing the light of Christ to stream in. When we pause, breathe, and turn our hearts toward God, we invite His presence to illuminate the shadows of our lives. Are there shutters in your soul that need to be opened to let in His light? In this sacred quiet, God's humility meets our own. We bow our hearts in adoration and gratitude, acknowledging that He is the source of all life and hope. The Christmas story itself is one of quiet moments. The silent night of Christ's birth, the hushed wonder of the shepherds, the reverent stillness of Mary pondering these things in her heart. Can we enter into that same stillness, even for a few moments each day? Imagine a small, unadorned gift, wrapped in brown paper, yet filled with extraordinary treasure. This is the essence of God's gift to us in the birth of Christ, a simple package containing infinite love. C.S. Lewis reminds us that God often works through the humble and unassuming. The Christmas story is a testament to this truth. A baby born in a lowly manger, visited not by kings and nobles, but by shepherds and wise men alike. Have we lost sight of the beauty of simplicity in our pursuit of grander things? In a world captivated by consumption and excess, the message of Christmas invites us to return to simplicity. Jesus, the King of Kings, came not in wealth, but in poverty, not with pomp, but in humility. His life teaches us that true richness lies in relationships, service, and acts of love. Are we measuring our lives by what we accumulate, or by the kindness we extend to others? The spirit of charity flows naturally from a heart uncluttered by the need for more. When we give, we reflect the heart of God, who gave us the greatest gift of all. In Matthew 25:40, Jesus tells us, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Have we considered that our small acts of generosity, a meal shared, a kind word, a helping hand, are offerings to Christ Himself? C.S. Lewis believed that charity is not merely an obligation, but a joyful response to God's love. It is like a stream that flows naturally from a wellspring of gratitude. When our hearts are filled with the light of Christ, giving becomes a delight, not a burden. What streams of charity can flow from your life this season? Whose burdens can you help lighten, even in simple ways? The humility of Christ's birth calls us to give not just from our abundance, but from our hearts. True charity often means giving time, attention, and compassion, gifts that cannot be bought. In a season where the world rushes toward extravagance, can we choose the quiet joy of giving with sincerity and love? As we embrace simplicity and charity, we step closer to the heart of Christmas. Each act of generosity, no matter how small, is a candle lit in the darkness, spreading the light of Christ. And perhaps, as we give, we will discover that we have received far more than we ever offered, the gift of renewal, peace, and the joy of knowing we have served our King. Faith, in its truest form, is not static, but a living, breathing force that reshapes everything it touches. C.S. Lewis often described faith as the catalyst for inner transformation, a force that invites us to become more like Christ. The birth of Jesus, wrapped in humility and love, calls us to this same transformation. Have you ever wondered if your faith is merely a belief or a journey of becoming? Imagine a seed planted in the soil. Left untended, it remains dormant, but with care, light, and water, it bursts into life, growing into something vibrant and strong. Our faith, too, requires nurturing through prayer, reflection, and acts of service. Are we tending to our faith in a way that allows it to grow and transform us, or have we left it unattended, hoping it will thrive on its own? C.S. Lewis reminds us that transformation is not an instant process. He wrote, "God is not merely mending, not simply restoring a status quo. Rather, he is transforming us into something new." The incarnation, God taking on flesh, was not just a moment in history, but the beginning of a divine work that continues in each of us. Are we allowing God to reshape our hearts and minds, or are we resisting his gentle hands? True faith moves us toward a life of service, gratitude, and love. Like a river flowing outward, transformed faith cannot remain self-contained. It seeks to touch others, to bring hope where there is despair, and light where there is darkness. Do our lives reflect the humility and love of Christ, or are we still caught in the grip of self-interest and pride? Consider the shepherds who left their flocks to seek the newborn King, their lives forever changed by a single encounter. When we truly meet Christ, our priorities shift. We begin to see the world through his eyes, with compassion, grace, and a desire to serve. Is your faith leading you to actions that reflect his love, or has it become a passive belief? This Christmas season, let us invite God to transform us. As we reflect on the mystery of the Incarnation, may our faith grow deeper, leading us to lives marked by hope, charity, and renewal. And perhaps, as we allow this transformation, we will find ourselves walking more closely with Christ, becoming lights in a world longing for redemption. As we approach the manger and reflect on the birth of Christ, we are invited to consider what this season truly means for our lives. Are we prepared to let the humility, simplicity, and love of Jesus reshape us? This sacred moment of eternity entering time is not just a story to be celebrated, but a reality to be lived. Take a moment to ask yourself, what small changes can I make to reflect God's light this season? Perhaps it's offering a kind word, embracing stillness in prayer, or practicing charity in quiet ways. Each choice to follow Christ's path of humility and service brings us closer to the heart of Christmas. Let's share this message of hope and transformation with others. If this touched your heart, type in the comments, "Christ's light guides me to renewal." And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this reflection so others can experience the joy and renewal of Christmas, as C.S. Lewis so beautifully encouraged.